Die Frankfurter Buchmesse 2008, die Faszination Comic. Wir berichten live in Bild, Text, Ton und Video von dieser Leitmesse, die in diesem Jahr ihr 60. Jubiläum feiert.
Comics from Denver, Colorado, and I'm here to try and provide everyone with some insights about what's happening with the comics market in the United States. To give you a little bit of background, I'm the largest comics retailer in America, and I have been for the last 25 years. I currently have 3 stores and 5 warehouses in the USA. I own 8 million plus comics. I have 60 employees. We ship over 1 million comics a year, and if you count our comics shipped versus comics published, we're actually the 4th or 5th largest publisher in America. But we don't publish anything. Normally here in Frankfurt, you're expected to give a talk. I think talks are boring, and I don't like giving talks, so I like answering questions, and then I talk, and I talk, and I talk, and I talk. So I'd like to start by, those of you who are here, do you have any questions about the American market? But just give me one springboard and I will run from there, okay? If you're here, you must have a thought. What about the American market intrigues you? What thoughts do you have about it? What misconceptions do you have about it? I'm willing to go with anything. Anyone? Eine Frage. Bitte. Where is Bob from? That's a good question. The last I heard, he and Aline Kaminsky had split up, and he's been showing up, I know, at some conventions on the West Coast, but in terms of what he's doing right now, I don't know. I do know that he's back, he's working, he's definitely working. And I can tell you that his artwork is escalating in price very, very rapidly. The early editions of Zap are finally starting to gain some value, especially the first 2, which were printed by Charles Plymell and Don Donahue. Those are, the underground market in the United States is starting to revive a great deal. But where Bob Crumb is right now specifically, who knows? I don't know if Bob knows where he is. So, thank you. Sure. Another question? Yes? Oh boy. You know, that's one of the biggest problems with America, is that the market in America for young talent is extremely fragmented. I would say that if you want to see who the best artists and writers are right now of the new generation, you should take a look, go on the internet and look for the Harvey Awards. Those are named after Harvey Kurtzman, and they were recently given out at the Baltimore Comic Book Convention. And the Harvey Awards are for the best new and upcoming creators in small press. Also, you can take a look at the Eisner Awards. The Eisners are given out at San Diego, and the Eisners are generally for people who have moved from the first level to the second level. A lot of times they're working within DC, but oftentimes for Vertigo, as a case in point, or they're working for Dark Horse. But that would be my recommendation. Look for whoever won an Eisner this year. That's voted on by comics creators and comics fans. Harveys are voted on, I believe, just by creators. Okay, those are where you can find those resources. Okay? If you want to know what my favorite comic being published right now is, it's Fables by Bill Willingham, published by DC through the Vertigo imprint. Fables is an incredibly great story which merges fairy tale characters together into a single mythos, and then pits that mythos against an alternate universe which is dominated by fairy tale characters of intense cruelty. So Fables is a wonderful, wonderful story. First book starts a little slow. By the second book, it's fantastic.
How did the recent movie adaptations of superhero comic books influence the market?
Oh, they just kicked our ass. Oh, the month of July for me, I lost $100,000 because of those damn movies. I was so angry. the problem is that there's only a person who's a comic book fan only has a certain amount of disposable income. And a lot of comics fans, they don't have really good paying jobs. So as a consequence, if they go to 5 superhero films in the month of July, sometimes like for Dark Knight, a lot of people went twice. For Iron Man, a lot of people went twice or 3 times. It took all my money. I ended up starving. So far this year, we've had a really good year in the American comics business. But the month of July, when all of those films came out, was terrible. Now, August picked up, and September, when the rest of the American economy went way downhill, our comic sales were up 20%. So it could be that the films helped in the longer term, but the immediacy right during the month of July, 5 weeks in a row of having a major comic film break, was terrible. It was just awful. So, next. I'm easy. I can answer almost any question, or at least I have an opinion on it. Well, let me give you a little bit of an overview. The American comics market right now is, on the one hand, very robust, because we have a lot of new creators who are putting out a great deal of material, which is some of the best comics material that's ever been published in America. On the downside, American comics distribution is having huge problems because there are nowhere near as many outlets where you can buy comics anymore. As a result, print runs on American comics are actually oftentimes quite a bit lower than what they have been in the past. An American comic book that would have sold 100,000 copies 10 years ago is now selling 40,000 copies. So the market in many regards for American comics has diminished because we simply do not have the number of retail outlets that we once did. Unlike Europe, where you can buy comics at all manner of newsstands, in America, newsstands for all intents and purposes are now gone. In many regards, newspapers in America are almost gone. First of all, very few people read, and second of all, you can get your newspaper now on the internet, and everyone's reading their newspapers for free. So there's no particular reason to buy newspapers, which is a bit of a problem because newspapers are where people used to read comic strips, and comic strips would oftentimes lead to them reading some types of comic collections, which would then lead them into reading a graphic novel. We're having a real problem because we don't have newsstands as much in America anymore. On the flip side, we are seeing more comics distribution through traditional bookstores, but traditional bookstores in America are also failing right now. Amazon.com has taken away a huge amount of the bookstore trade, so even the large bookstore chains are suffering, such as Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble just put itself up for sale, and if it doesn't sell, it might go into liquidation. So we're in the American book trade, the American comics trade, we're having some very, very serious problems. Another perspective, though, is that back issues in America are selling extremely well. So while new comics are not selling as well as they once did, back issues now are more than double the sales of new comics, both in terms of units and in terms of dollars. So we have this incredibly vibrant and dynamic back issue business, a lot of which is going through eBay. And yet, the new comics business itself, just looking at the raw numbers, sales are not that good. My particular area of expertise is back issues, and I can tell you that we're seeing more and more fans who want to buy older American comics. But the new business has a certain amount of problems that are involved in. At this point, for example, there are only about 800 comic shops left in America that carry a full line of comics. There's maybe another 1,000 that carry a few comics, but in terms of full line comic shops, there are only about 800, maybe 1,000 left in all of the country. American comics get reprinted a lot. They have The American perspective on life tends to be very dynamic and tends to be very exciting. And as a result, we find that licensing American comics is relatively easy, and they get reprinted all over the world. And yet within our home market, we are suffering from a lot of problems from distribution, and then also from the fact that so many Americans no longer read. I read a survey the other day that said that when they looked at the American population, 40% of Americans had not read a book, a single book, not one book in the last year. It's not unusual at all for me when I go into someone's house, they don't own a book. You go to someone's home and in their entire house, not a zip, not a single book. And I wonder how these people, how they're intellectually bankrupt. But I just can explain the way that it is. I do what I can to try and subvert their children, obviously. But people who choose not to read, there's not a lot that I can do about that. One of the things that was mentioned in the description for this talk was the complete peanuts. We have seen a lot of comic strip collections do quite well, and they're doing quite well in terms of going into mainstream bookstores, and Amazon is selling a lot. We find, though, and I think this, you might find this interesting, Amazon lists a lot of trade paperbacks for sale at steep discount, but when you go to order them, they actually don't have them. The problem is, we can't afford to match Amazon's discounts, so they might offer a book at a discount of 35%, and we offer the same book at 25%, but people won't order from us, even though Amazon doesn't have it, because they wait for Amazon to get it, and yet the book oftentimes is out of print, so Amazon will never get it. But Amazon still undermines our business. And so there are some interesting aspects. I think here in Europe, that to this point, the internet has not had as much of an impact because books here cannot be sold at a discount until they're a certain age. Whereas in America, the minute that books are published, they're steeply discounted. Oftentimes, the most popular books in America are sold at 40% off the day that they're released. So the New York Times bestseller books are selling at 40% off instantly. That greatly benefits Amazon, which can do very large shipments and very large purchases and can get large economies of scale. But it is greatly to the detriment of newsstand and small shops. And that's the reason why we're having such a problem with distribution. Basically, it doesn't really matter how good the comics are if the retailing mechanism and the distribution mechanism is not in place to get them out into the hands of the people who might be interested in them. And what we have in America today is a corruption of our retail and distribution system, which acts to the direct detriment of the sales of comics. On the panel yesterday, it was extremely humbling for me because I found that today, American comics are selling approximately $1 billion a year. Of that, about 250 million, 1/4, ein Viertel, is new comics, and 75% is back issues or ancillary products like statues or toys. But even at that point, when you think in terms of the American market being $1 billion, Japanese manga went down in sales last year, and it's still $4.8 billion. That's very humbling when you realize that the American market, where we think of Superman and Spider-Man and these very iconic characters as coming from, and yet our market, relative to the market of comics markets in the rest of the world, is actually quite small, particularly as a percentage of population. So why are American comics still going? Because they can make movies out of it. One major publisher, who I can't mention by name, confided in me that he was only able to keep his company going because he was able to convince the corporate people above him to no longer treat comics as a profit and loss center. All of the money that they put into comics now is considered research and development, with the hope that the comics that they publish, if they publish 100 different titles, that one of them will turn into a major film, and that's where the profit comes from. That's where the money comes from. On the print runs alone, most American comics today would not even be viable because the print runs are so small. For an individual state in the United States, it is not uncommon for a comic to sell 500 or 600 copies. If you're looking at some of the lower line DC or Marvel comics, they sell 30,000 for the whole country, and that includes exports to Europe. 30,000 in 50 states, that's 600 copies. That's almost nothing. But one Dark Knight movie or one Spider-Man movie can pay the expenses of the entire publishing company many times over. I'll tell you a funny story. Steven Spielberg has a company called DreamWorks. Unbeknownst to me, I was involved in a scam to fool Steven Spielberg. A gentleman that I know who publishes comics got in contact with me, and he asked me if I would buy 2,000 copies of a graphic novel from him. No one had ever heard of this graphic novel. It was by an artist no one had ever heard of, a writer no one had ever heard of. It was something I would normally have ordered 5 copies of, maybe. He said, order 2,000. I said, I'm not crazy, I'm not going to order 2,000. He said, look, he said, your wholesale cost on this is going to be $4.95 a copy. I said, okay. He said, for every one you order, we'll send you a check for $5.95. So you'll make $1 per book profit, and you get to keep the books. I said, well, now where does this make any sense? Why would you give me $1 more than I'm getting from the distributor? He said, just do it. I said, okay, 2,000. And so I ordered 2,000 from the distributor. I paid the distributor $10,000. He sent me a check for $12,000. Easy money. I was trying to figure out, why the hell did he do that? Why would he do that? And the answer was, he was trying to sell the film rights to DreamWorks. He was trying to sell an option to them, and he wanted to show that this trade paperback, this graphic novel, was a success. And he got me and 5 other guys to order 2,000 copies each, so it went up, and I think it was in Diamonds like #2 or #3 for that month as a new release. He took that to Spielberg, and he did it. He sold the rights to Spielberg, because when they were selling DreamWorks recently, it was in their listing of properties, and there was that graphic novel, and I was just amazed. What a scam. But the numbers are so small these days that you can affect the process that way. When a top-selling graphic novel is only 10,000 copies in the USA, and you're willing to pay a $10,000 bribe, effectively, to get 5 retailers to buy in on a book, you can manipulate the numbers to make it appear that you have a great and exciting new property. Again, I'll ask for questions from anybody who'd like to ask a question, because I can go on about any subject on USA Publishing. I've been selling comics for 40 years, so I know where a lot of the dirt is buried. Yeah? The economic situation for comic creators is that most of them can't make a living. There are a few working for the large publishers that do quite well, but not as well as they used to. I can still remember when Chris Claremont was writing the X-Men back in the mid-1980s, and the regular series of X-Men was making enough money that they paid Claremont $1 million a year between the initial payment for his story and then his royalties for reprinting the stories as trade paperbacks. Nowadays, I think that a typical comics creator is making maybe 1/10 of that for the ones who are successful. But some creators who are able to retain their rights are still doing fairly well. But the small press in America, print runs are very, very low. Oftentimes, everyone is printing comics just to break even and make no money, just to keep them out there in the hope that they can then sell some sort of licensing right, whether it be for turning them into a graphic novel or for a film. So it's almost like a big casino where everyone's playing roulette, and you hope that the little ball lands on your graphic novel or your comic. Because if you do, like Eastman and Laird from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they became millionaires as a result of Chaim Saban saying, I'm going to take this project and turn it into a big movie and a toy empire, and so they became millionaires. But that's much harder to do today, and I think that it's going to be even harder to do in the future. But that having been said, I started my first store in 1974, and at that time the sales in the comic book industry were going like this for new comics, because all the distribution, all the newsstands in those days were going away. But what I found with my store was that during a recession, people buy more comics rather than less. And so it would not surprise me at all if the next couple of years were quite good in the American comics business. But we already know that there's going to be quite a few films made. Movies tend to also, any kind of entertainment does well during recessions. And unfortunately, it looks like we're heading into quite a powerful recession over the next couple of years, at least in the USA. Another question. Okay, I can give you a report on a couple of conventions. How many of you have ever attended a convention in the USA? Okay, did you have a good time? San Diego, and you went to San Diego. New York, okay. If any of you would like to see a fantastic American convention, in February, I think it's on February 5th, the New York show will be happening again. And this year, the New York show had more than 50,000 people, and this year they got the logistics right. This is the 4th year for the New York show, and in year 1, they had a hall that was too small, and they had almost riots in the street as a result. They had to call in the state police to handle the crowds. People who had purchased tickets in advance were not allowed to come in the building because they oversold the building. And the fire department said the building is too full, no one else can come in. But this year I went to New York and it was perfect. They had 50, 60,000 people, great exhibits, lots of room, and the hotels are expensive, but from Germany to New York, the airfare is cheap, at least relatively spoken. So if you want to see a great American convention, New York is a great show to go to. If you want to see a bad American convention, you can go to San Diego. Now, San Diego is the largest American comic convention. It has sold out last year. It had 115,000 people who came to it. But the reason why I say it's a bad comic convention is because it's over 50% film. They've sold all their big booths now, are controlled by Warner Brothers, Lucasfilms, the people that do Pokemon, I mean Tokyo Pop, I mean the amount of actual comics booths there is maybe 20% of the total. There's still a lot of good comics programming, and many comics creators go there, but in the exhibit hall, comics are becoming smaller and smaller portion of the overall convention. And if you want to go to San Diego, you must buy a ticket now, and you must get a hotel now, because the convention takes up all the hotel rooms for 50 miles. And the tickets for the whole show sold out last year in March. So if you want to go to that convention, you really need to hurry. There are also many conventions in the USA that are Wochenende conventions, where they're 1 day or 2 day, and they have very few guests, but you can go and you can buy lots and lots of comics, and they're very inexpensive. Very inexpensive. I just bought a truckload full of comics at the Baltimore convention. I bought 300,000 comics in 6 days and filled a 17-meter truck to the ceiling. And I can tell you, in America, you can get comics right now very, very inexpensively. Back issue comics, at most conventions, you can buy as many as you want for $1. So there's some really great deals out there. Okay, another chance for questions. Yeah. Okay, the question is, what is the share, the market share in the United States of European comics, manga, and American-derived comics, primarily superhero comics? That's a really good question because we don't get the numbers. And the reason I say that is because so much of the manga is sold through bookstores. Manga in the comic shops is very small. It is perhaps 10%, 15%. European comics are 0%. In America, European comics are oftentimes considered very slow-paced, and American readers won't read them. They are far too much story-driven and character-driven, and not enough action. And Americans have to have things like this. It has to be very rapid. It has to, if it's not moving, they don't want to read it. Unless it has sex. Milo Manara, they'll read. Okay? So if it has sex, then they're willing to go slow. But otherwise, Americans do not read European comics as a general rule. There are always a few specialists who are wise enough to go in and read things, but it's a very, very small percentage. Within the American market, Marvel has about a 45% market share, DC has about a 35% market share, and the rest is small press. But the vast majority of new comics being sold are Marvel and DC. The irony is that American comics sell vastly better in Europe than European comics sell in America. And I've tried to help European publishers. I've been coming to the Frankfurt Fair for 20 years as a handler, and I've had so many times I've said, oh, this is a beautiful comic, I'm going to take it back, I can sell this. No one will buy them. It's cultural differences. Yes?
The graphic novel, the literary sort of graphic novel that seems to be getting a lot of critic space in the papers. Sort of the graphic novel as an actual, product.
Yes.
So somebody who writes this story, like Blankets or something like that.
Yes.
How do you see that going in the States?
Oh, I think there's huge potential.
Is there going to be a new niche, where that will take on, where the creators will be more ambitious and try and do a Dostoevsky or using the comic medium?
Well, we hope so. The problem is that the costs for doing a graphic novel require a lot more in the way of upfront capital than doing the traditional magazine Hefte format. I have friends who have written original graphic novels, and Chris Staros has actually published those, and he published Blankets originally. And when you get one that's a winner, that's fantastic, because then you can do multiple printings and it sells and it sells and it sells. But the problem is that if you have one that does not strike a chord with the readership, you print 10,000 because that's your minimum print run, and you might sell 1,000, and then the rest of them are a loss. And that's the problem, is that our publishers who do want to publish original graphic novel material don't have the capital to withstand the losses. And right now, there's maybe one winner for every 20 original graphic novel series that's published. That's why they try to publish them first as serials in the magazine format, and then if the serial is successful or breaks even, then any money that they make from the graphic novel is pure profit, because they've already paid all their production and setup charges. They have all their film directly from having already done the serializations. So that's what, you know, in effect, that's what DC does. When you're reading most Vertigo stories are chapters of a graphic novel. And some graphic novels are justified to go ahead and reprint them for the bookstores in that format, but a lot of them do not. And ironically, that's where I make most of my money. When a story is published that doesn't reach the popularity to be turned into a graphic novel or a trade paperback, those are the ones that people have to come to me to get, because I carry the backlist. And so that's the niche that I fill. So, but we do want to see a lot more original graphic novels. I mean, ever since Mouse came out and you know, won the Pulitzer Prize and is now one of the most, Mouse is used in a lot of schools in America now as a part of their English programs of their in high schools for literature. And so the graphic novel format has tremendous potential, but for it to work, publishers have to have money. If the publishers are all small and weak, they can't afford to take the risks. Yeah?
Because I don't know if this has been asked already, because I arrived late, but I would be interested to know if the manga boom is affecting American comic books.
It greatly helped us. The manga boom brought a lot of young women into reading comics, and then a lot of them have branched out and are reading a lot of American comics collections like Bone, or I think they're part of the audience for Peanuts. I think that for comics collections, these young women definitely developed an interest in comics, because we were doing an awful job of reaching young women. Most American comic shops were like a clubhouse. If a young woman walked into a shop, she felt very, very uncomfortable. Yeah, hell, if I go into a comic shop, I feel uncomfortable because they don't want no outsiders. You know, it's all just, you know, 43 guys, you know, who haven't got a girlfriend all sitting around in a little room. Well, if that's your primary marketing mechanism, how can your business ever grow? And I've been an advocate for having beautiful open stores with good lighting, clean, no pizza crusts on the counter. I've tried to make American comic shops better, but it hasn't worked too well. I'm afraid that my peers in the business just don't have the same aesthetic as I do. And so most comic shops are still clubhouses. That having been said, most manga in the USA was sold through Barnes & Noble and other large bookstore chains. And so there, young women felt very comfortable. They're in a lot of Barnes & Nobles, they have like coffee shops inside the store. And so it's a very nice place to go, and you read comics and you talk to your friends. And all of the above having been said, manga is not doing so well in the USA today. The best titles have already all been released, and the newer material is not as popular. Also, there is so much being released that it's fragmenting the market. So when the market fragments, then less and less profit goes to one individual book. And so I think manga may be, I don't know if it'll ever go completely out, but I think it's on a significant decline right now, which is a shame. I would rather that it stay. But that's the way it's going. Yes?
Tell about the internet. Yesterday you told the story that eBay was selling a lot of comics.
Yeah.
And tell me about the market of internet.
Well, the internet market is phenomenal for comics, to the extent that it's much easier to be able to see what a comic looks like, and you can also go to a lot of forums and you can read as to whether you might like a comic or not like a comic. In terms of acting as a marketing mechanism, the internet has been brilliant as a tool for selling comics, because it could not have been designed better to provide comics fans with an opportunity to sample the comics that they might or might not want to read. And oftentimes now, people have done with comics what was done with music, to the extent that you can do downloads now, and you can download a lot of American comics whole. And so if you want to find out if you want to actually go buy a collection, you can read it first. Now this is a very important point. You would think that it would be counterintuitive that someone who would read something for free online would then buy it. But we did some experiments with Marvel Comics 4 years ago. What we did was, there were comics in America are released on Wednesday. We would get Marvel Comics downloads on Monday morning. We would post them to our website. We actually put them on our server. And what that meant was that every comics retailer in America could link to our server and could show their customers free the whole comic book of an issue that was coming up on Wednesday. Now, if you think about that, you would think that if people could read a comic book on Monday for free, they would not buy it then on Wednesday. That would be logical. Totally untrue. The average sales increase on the comics that we gave away for free was 20% more than the original orders. Because a lot of people don't want to read a comic or buy it off of the newsstand for fear they might not like it. But if they read it online, that isn't quite as satisfying as holding it in your hand. And so as a result, Marvel would overprint their books that they were putting online by 20 to 30%. And there were times when we sold the entire overprinting the day they were released. Now you might ask yourself, why isn't Marvel doing this more if it worked? And the answer is because the guy who owns Marvel is as greedy as the day is long. And when he found out that he was giving it away, he fired the people who were in charge of the program. And one Monday morning, nothing showed up. And we started calling New York, where are the comics? And they said, oh, they don't work here anymore. And we can't give you any more free stuff. And I said, but we were making your sales go up. And they said, yes, but it was free. But no, we sold all the comics that were pre-ordered. Nobody said, I don't want this anymore. They took them. And we sold 20% more. But it was free, so we can't do free. God save me from idiots. I have been in this business for 40 years. American comics don't sell because the people that publish them are morons. Okay? That's the nicest and kindest way to put it. I have survived 10 administrations at Marvel. 10! I have a collection of cards, business cards. I collect business cards from Marvel presidents and vice presidents because there have been so many. And some of them are really, really rare because they were only there 6 weeks. Idiots! one and all. And they are so arrogant. They all act like as if they're God's gift to publishing, and they don't know shit. I'm just telling you, okay? If I had the ability to influence events, actually influence them in the American comics market, American comics would be selling 10 times what they are right now. And I say that not out of ego, I say that simply because I've seen things that I do work. And it just stuns me that I come up with these great ideas, we test the ideas, the tests work, and then some greedy son of a bitch says, oh, we can't give it away. Give me a break. So sometimes success or the lack of success is the triumph or the failure of simple intellect. And unfortunately, the people that publish comics in the USA oftentimes are not stellar in terms of their intellectual capacities. I'll tell you one quick story. Back in 1986, Marvel Comics changed their name to Marvel Entertainment. Does anybody remember this? It was a long time ago. Why did they change their name to Marvel Entertainment? They weren't doing anything different that year from the other year. But the difference was that the president of Marvel at that time was ashamed to be publishing comic books. He had come from Scholastic, from doing children's books, and most of his friends and neighbors and associates were in the book trade. And so he didn't want to tell people at cocktail parties that he was a comic book publisher, even though he ran the largest comic book publishing house in America. So he had them change the name, so he no longer had to have the word comics on his business card. Those are the kinds of jackasses that I have been dealing with my entire adult life. And I used to be more reticent. But I'm getting old enough now, and I've been ill recently, and I don't give a damn anymore. I'm just going to say it the way that it is. The American comic book industry is collapsing under the weight of idiocy. And it's such a shame because the American comics being produced today are some of the best that have ever been produced. They are really, really good. And I encourage you, if you can take a look at some of the reprints that are available here and take a look at some of the stuff that's at the publishers, it's just a stunning waste of potential. And I really wish that I could tell you that it was doing better. I mean, I'm doing better. I've outlasted all these idiots, well, to now. I've sold $125 million in comics. And just to give you kind of a sense of perspective, think about, maybe there's more here in Europe, certainly it's not true in the US. I've been the largest seller of comics in the USA since 1981. That's 27 years. Now it's not a big niche, it's a little niche, but it's my niche. Think for a moment how many companies have managed to survive being number one in a niche, any niche, for 27 years. I've stayed number one despite the fact that I've had, at times, 10,000 competitors who wanted to put me out of business because they all wanted to be number one, duh. And the thing is, can I get a word in edgewise with these guys? Psst. So, I wish I could tell you more positive things. Maybe, this is my one bit of hope, maybe if the whole thing falls apart, then maybe they'll finally listen to me. It seems that they listen to me when they really have problems. It's just that, you know, when they get the slightest bit of success, then I'm back out the back door again.
That was a couple years ago.
Oh yeah, Marvel went bankrupt. Yeah. That was one of the changes of administration. I actually was involved with a group that tried to buy Marvel. I was with Jim Shooter, and we had $200 million in money that was pledged to us by a banking group. They wanted to make an investment, and I was going to be the head of marketing at Marvel. And when I found out that what I had to do that, I was delighted when our group was outbid. But see, the difference is that we weren't willing to lie, cheat, or steal. I'm serious. I'm not joking. Okay? The reason we lost was because we were not willing to lie. We had $200 million cash. The people that beat us out pledged $450 million in notes. They just wrote on a piece of paper, I will give you $450 million. They never did. That was stupid. The only reason the deal went down was because the people that were doing the sale when Marvel was bankrupt, that was Chase Manhattan Bank. And the person who was in charge of the sale could go to her boss and said, look, I got $450 million. It was a note. It was eventually redeemed for about 180. Our bid in cash was actually higher than their bid in a note that they had never actually intended to pay on. But that's the way that it works, and it's that corrupting influence. And in many regards, if you're reading the newspaper today and you're seeing the problems with the big bankers like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and so on that went broke, same thing. These notes are all crap. But notes look better than cash if you're looking at them on a quarterly basis. But if you're looking at them over 5 years and they don't pay, what good are they? If nobody ever pays on the note. But anyway, yeah, we were looking to buy Marvel at that one time. But Marvel, that was in '98. Marvel had 3 different presidents in 12 months in '98. One of whom knew absolutely nothing about comics. He was a good friend of mine, but he couldn't tell a comic book from a brick. I still have a little time, and I got a lot of opinions, so...
You didn't talk about eBay. Yeah, you said an interesting anecdote yesterday about eBay.
Okay. eBay is generating right now, and I got to give you the background here. At the New York Comic Convention, I was approached by 2 gentlemen, and they said, we want to do a comic book price guide, and we want to buy all of your reported sales data, because they wanted to be able to charge people for going online and seeing what real prices were on American comic books. And they told me that they had already purchased from eBay their sales data from the previous year so they could tell what comic books had sold for on eBay. And they told me that eBay last year sold $400 million in the American comics category. And that number really shocked me because American comics, new comics, are only selling about 250 million. And so eBay by itself sells more comics, backlist, out of print, than all the new comics in America put together. And I had thought that the American comics business was in a bit of a recession because in 1993, at the top, we were selling about $700 million worth of comics, almost all new. In 1993, American backlist sales were very small. But what has transpired, and it's been very quiet, and most of us didn't realize this, was that little by little, backlist has become the predominant mechanism by which American comics are selling. And so it's almost the tail wagging the dog, to use an American expression. Once upon a time, new comics produced some backlist sales. Now it appears backlist sales actually create new comic sales, because if a creator has a backlist that people like, they're much more likely to buy that creator's new material. And so there's this huge shift. I am estimating that the American comics market right now is at $1 billion, with 75% of that being backlist. to me, that's an astonishing number. That's never existed before in the past. To give you a basis of comparison, when we were at 700 million in 1993, backlist might have been 100 million. So backlist was 18% of new comics in 1993, and it's 300% of new comics today. That's astounding growth. So that was the point that I was trying to make, is that it has just completely shifted. Now I will say this, some of the eBay number might include some new trade paperbacks. I offer new trades on eBay, and there's a couple of other companies that do. But I think my new trade sales might be 50,000 a year. I mean, they're not very much, not on eBay. Okay? But eBay, I think you're going to see as a fixed price mechanism. How many of you have ever gone on eBay? Oh yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, everybody's gone on eBay. Okay, eBay has two mechanisms, auctions and then marketplace, the fixed price. And we're one of the largest listers in the world on fixed price. We have, on any given day, between 200 and 250,000 listings of American comics. And what eBay has said is that they're moving away from the auction model, and they're moving toward fixed price more and more because they're trying to compete more effectively with Amazon. So I may go on Amazon back again. Yeah, you had a question? I like your t-shirt, by the way. I got my All-Stars right here.
Thanks, Chuck. What's the impact of scanned comics on the comic industry? Like, there's the DCP team, they scan the comics, and they're then illegally downloaded. They have huge backlists.
Oh, you mean in terms of downloads?
Yeah.
You know, it beats the hell out of me. I don't know. It's something that I should know more about. But not one single customer, employee, no one has ever mentioned that they look at those. I've surveyed a little bit, and I hear every once in a while people will say, oh yeah, I read that, I read blah blah. But it's not the kind of thing, it's not like Napster or something like that, where it's become extremely popular and everybody is using it. I don't hear that. If I thought that the publishers thought it was a problem, I would probably hear it from them. I don't know. The publishers, I can tell you this at one time. This was at one time. Paul Levitz actually said that he was going to sue me out of business for, on my website we have scans of the covers of all the DC comics. And in the first year that I did scans, I did Marvel only, because Paul said he wouldn't allow me to do DCs. And soon after that, there was a Supreme Court ruling from some people who used Beanie Baby images in a Beanie Baby price guide. And the Supreme Court ruled against Ty, the company that owns Beanie Babies, and said, no, that's a right of fair usage. And so we now have a policy of doing the cover in the first 3 pages. And Paul and I have had some vigorous discussions about whether or not that's allowed under fair usage laws. The answer basically is that if they decided they wanted to sue me, I couldn't afford to defend myself because they have lawyers on staff, and I just got me. But that having been said, they've chosen not to press the issue. But on the other hand, if they could catch any of these people that were doing whole copy books, DC never participated. When Marvel participated in doing whole copy advances, DC would not. I couldn't get Paul. And Paul, you have to understand, Paul Levitz and I are really good friends at this point. I mean, I've known Paul for 35 years. And his first outlook, always though, is for DC. He is an incredibly loyal DC advocate. And so when he disagrees with me and we argue and bicker about things, it's never from any animosity. It's just from him trying to protect DC's interests. But they basically have decided that, in light of the Supreme Court decision, that I can do what I want. So
you've spoken about the shift to eBay.
Yes.
Why do you think that is? Are people trying to get their comics cheaper than they, or trying to have them at the fingertips of the keyboard? Or what's the reason for that?
Well, it used to be price. I think to a great extent now it's familiarity. eBay was the first transactional mechanism that a lot of people used, and it was fairly easy to use, and people just got used to it, and it became a fairly simple thing. eBay also has the feedback mechanism where people can see very quickly whether a seller is doing a good job or not doing a good job, and that quickly weeded out the sellers that were not doing a good job. It used to be that we actually, through Mile High Comics, would get a lot more orders, especially from here in Europe, because people were afraid to order from anyone else in the USA for fear that their merchandise would never arrive. But eBay actually really hurt us, my company, in that regard, because they, through their feedback mechanism, they gave people the confidence to order through eBay. I don't think, though, that 5 or 10 years from now that eBay is going to be anywhere near the dominant player in the market that it is today. I think eBay is going to have to change their model quite a bit. They were really good yesterday.
Hi, Chuck. Nice to see you here at the fair. I have a question regarding original art. Since
boy.
I knew that'd throw you off. How do you see the development of the original art market? I would imagine that it's now something that the baby boomers and you know, people getting older, remembering their old heroes, that they're looking to have a lot more disposable income now. I would imagine before the financial crisis that they would in the end be ready and willing to spend a lot of money, more money than originally on the comic books, now on the original art.
Yes. There's a couple of different things. First of all, more comics original art is showing up in galleries, and more comics original art is being put into museums. So comics original art is getting a lot more validation than it had in the past. But there's an important thing about eBay, and that is that eBay rewards true scarcity. So in other words, what you've seen on eBay is that prices on comics that were mass-produced, like Spawn #1, have gone from $20 to $2. But prices on pieces of original art that you used to be able to buy for $15 are now $300 to $500, because a piece of original art, by definition, is unique. It is the one single piece. There will never be another. If you own that piece, you have the only one. There might be another piece that's similar. I collect Native American pottery, and it's the same thing. Native American pottery, the pottery that I collect, is all handmade, hand-built, hand-fired, and so as a result, each piece is original art. And the prices on anything on eBay that is actually an original, that is unique, have been going way up. But prices on mass-produced goods, unless they genuinely are scarce, have been going down. I just wrote a column about this for, I write a column for the Comics Buyer's Guide in the USA, which is the largest American fanzine. And I mentioned that, you know, the real shift that we've seen is that eBay has helped define what is rare and in high demand, what is rare but has no demand, and what is common. And acting in that way, eBay has created, in effect, a stock market for collectibles of all kinds. Comics on one hand, original art on the other. The original art market right now is approximately 10 times higher than it was 5 years ago. And that has caused some comics to suffer, because the creators, particularly Image Comics as a case in point, Image tends to be a linked series of splash pages because the artists make more money selling the original art than they do from printing the comic. So instead of having numerous panels on a single page, an Image comic oftentimes will be a series of very large images, large character images, or large splash pages because they're creating the comic book itself with the intention of selling the art rather than creating the art with the intention of selling the comic. So in that way, it's actually bastardizing the entire process.
What about derivatives like lunchboxes or collectibles?
I don't know enough about those. I know that the market on them has been very popular and that they've been doing well. Especially the ones that really are rare. But again, eBay rewards, there has to be a supply-demand conjunction to where something has to be both rare and desirable. If it's rare but not desirable, it brings no money. If it's rare and it has huge demand, it brings huge money. That's why a copy of Amazing Fantasy 15, the first Spider-Man comic, just sold for $130,000. And it wasn't even in top grade. Top grade would be a 10.0. It was only a 9.6. Now 9.6 is very, very, very beautiful. But a 9.6 Amazing Fantasy 15 sold for $130,000. A 9.4, which is slightly under that, sold for $120,000. Spider-Man original art pages are going now, the Ditko pages are going for over $100,000 each. A Wally Wood page from EC Comics, from one of the science fiction stories, just sold for, gosh, I don't want to exaggerate, I think it was $300,000, which is the highest ever brought for a single piece of comics original art. I mean, $300,000, that's huge. That's a lot of money. Okay, I've got 3 minutes. One more question? Don't be shy. If you've got one more question, you can still slide it in. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you very much. If any of you want to meet with me afterwards, I'm going to be around a little while. I'll be here all day on Saturday, and as you can probably tell, I'm really long on opinion, so I can tell you a lot of things. Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.